The final word was not a shout, but a signature. Alara watched as her stepfather, Marcus, pressed the pen to the paper, the scratch of the nib the only sound in the cavernous, empty hall of the house her father had built. The ink, a stark, unforgiving black, sealed the transaction. The house was sold. Her life within it was over. Marcus slid a thin envelope across the polished mahogany of the now barren dining table. It was a table her father had planed and sanded himself, his knuckles raw, his smile wide. Now it was just another asset, disposed of. $75, Marcus said, his voice as flat and gray as the cloudy sky outside. Your mother's things were sold to cover debts. This is what remains of your portion. A final settlement. He did not meet her eyes. He was a man of ledgers and bottom lines, and she was a rounding error he was eager to erase. Alara was 26 years old. She had buried her mother 3 weeks prior, a quiet affair under a stoic oak tree next to the plot where her father had rested for the last decade. She did not cry now. She did not plead. The grief was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach, too dense for tears. She had learned silence and resilience from her father, a surveyor who had charted the wild, forgotten corners of the territory. He had taught her not with lectures, but with his hands. He had taught her how to read the story of the land in its contours, how to use a sextant to find her place in the world, how to splice a rope, fletch an arrow, and how to tell true north by the sun and the stars. He taught her that competence was a form of prayer, that to do a job well was to honor the materials and the moment. From Marcus, she had learned only the brittle arithmetic of loss. She took the envelope. The paper was crisp, the coins inside disappointingly light. She had already packed. Her life fit into a single, worn leather satchel. It held a change of clothes, a whetstone, a coil of waxed twine, a small tin of dried beef, and the tools that mattered. Tucked into a canvas roll were a small dovetail saw, a set of chisels, and a folding rule, all with handles worn smooth by her father's grip. And in a special pocket, wrapped in oilcloth, was his plumb bob. It was cast from heavy brass, shaped like a teardrop, with a point so fine it could find the absolute heart of gravity. To her, it was not just a tool for finding a true vertical line. It was a compass for the soul. It was her only true inheritance. She stood, the satchel slung over her shoulder. The house echoed with the ghosts of laughter and the scent of sawdust and pine resin that she knew only she could remember. She did not look at Marcus as she walked to the door. She did not look back as she closed it behind her, the latch clicking shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The world was a vast, untracked map, and she was standing at the edge of it, with $75 and a plumb bob. She walked for 3 days, heading west, away from the soft green lands she knew, and into the harsher, drier country where the sky was bigger and the promises smaller. She slept in haylofts and under the cold, unblinking eyes of the stars, the brass plumb bob a comforting weight against her side. She ate sparingly, her movements deliberate, conserving energy as her father had taught her. In the small, dusty town of Redemption, a place that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of its own name, she stopped for supplies. The air was thick with alkali dust and the low murmur of gossip. It was in the general store, while weighing a small bag of flour, that she overheard the conversation. 2 old men, their faces topographical maps of sun and time, were laughing over a notice tacked to the community board. "Can you believe the county's still trying to unload the old Croft folly?" one said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby bucket. 90 years that place has been rotting. Cursed, I tell you. "Ain't no curse," the other rasped. "Just bad land and worse luck. Built on the edge of the great salt flat. Nothing grows but greasewood. The way station's been empty since Silas Croft up and vanished. They say his ghost still keeps watch for a stagecoach that'll never come." Ilara's gaze drifted to the notice. It was a simple, typewritten sheet advertising a quitclaim deed. For sale, the property known as the Black Creek Way Station. 1 stone structure, 1 well, condition unknown. 40 acres of arid land. Price, $50 as is. $50. It was a joke, a price set to clear a forgotten property from the county's books. To the men, it was a folly. To Alara, it was a number. It was a possibility. She bought the flour and a small slab of salt pork, then walked to the county clerk's office. The clerk was a portly man with a sweat-stained collar, who looked at her as if she were a piece of tumbleweed blown in by the wind. When she pointed to the notice and inquired about the property, he gave a short, barking laugh. "That old ruin? Lady, you don't want that. The roof's gone, the well's probably poisoned with alkali, and the only company you'll have is the wind and the lizards." "I'll take it," Alara said, her voice even. He blinked, his amusement turning to disbelief. "It's $50, non-refundable. No survey, no guarantees. You're buying a pile of rocks and a story." "I understand." She pushed 5 $10 bills across the counter, the bulk of her worldly wealth. The clerk shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips as he filled out the deed. He clearly thought her a fool, another drifter chasing a phantom. He stamped the document with a heavy, satisfying thud and slid it over to her. The name on the deed was now hers, Alara Vance, owner of a folly, proprietor of a ghost story. The journey to the way station took another full day. The clerk's hand-drawn map was crude, but with her father's compass and her own innate sense of direction, she navigated the fading track that led into the shimmering heat of the basin. The land grew steadily more desolate. The sparse grasses gave way to cracked earth and hardy, twisted creosote bushes that smelled of rain and dust. And then she saw it. It stood on a slight rise, overlooking a vast, blindingly white expanse of a dry lakebed that stretched to a hazy, mountainous horizon. The clerk had not exaggerated. It was a ruin. The main roof had collapsed inward, leaving charred rafters exposed to the sky like the ribs of a desiccated carcass. The adobe walls of a secondary structure had melted into lumpy mounds of earth, but the central building, the way station itself, was stone. Its walls were thick, made of heavy, dark river rock, and though scarred by time, they stood strong, defiant. A profound wave of despair washed over her, so potent it nearly buckled her knees. The scale of the dereliction was immense, the silence absolute and crushing. The wind whispered through the empty window frames, a mournful, lonely sound. For a moment, she felt the full weight of her isolation. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone, the owner of a forgotten failure in the middle of nowhere. But then her father's voice echoed in her memory, calm and steady as it had been when teaching her to navigate by starlight. "Start with what's solid. Find your footing." She took a deep breath, the dry, hot air searing her lungs, and walked toward the stone structure. Her boots crunched on shattered roof slates. The front door was gone, the opening a dark, gaping mouth. Inside, the air was still and thick with the dust of decades. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom through the broken roof, illuminating dancing motes of dust. Piles of rubble and wind-blown debris covered the floor, but the stone walls were as solid as the day they were laid. In the center of the main room stood a massive stone hearth, its mantel a single, enormous piece of hewn timber. It was a fortress, a foundation. She spent the rest of the afternoon clearing one corner of the main room, the one most protected by the remaining portion of the roof. She used a broken plank as a shovel, her movements methodical and tireless. She swept the stone floor clean with a bundle of sagebrush. This would be her shelter. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the vast sky, she built a small fire in the great hearth. The stones, cold for 90 years, slowly began to radiate a gentle warmth. She ate her salt pork and a piece of hardtack, watching the flames. The loneliness was still there, a quiet ache in her chest, but it was no longer a terrifying void. It was just a space she could begin to fill. For a week, she worked from sunup to sundown. She cleared the rubble from the main building, exposing the flagstone floor. She hauled water from the well. To her immense relief, after she cleared away the debris and lowered a bucket deep into the earth, the water it brought up was cool and sweet, filtered by deep layers of sand. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She was learning the rhythm of the place, the way the light moved across the salt flat, the sound of the wind, the scuttling of unseen creatures in the night. It was during the cleaning of the great hearth that she found it. She was brushing away the thick carpet of soot and ash from the firebox when her fingers brushed against a stone that felt different. It was smoother than the others, and when she pushed against it, it shifted just a fraction of an inch. Her heart gave a sudden, sharp thump. She examined it closely. The mortar around this single rectangular stone was a slightly different color, finer than the coarse mixture holding the rest of the hearth together. Using the tip of one of her father's chisels, she carefully scraped away the old mortar. It was brittle, crumbling to dust. After an hour of patient work, she was able to pry the stone loose. It came away with a low groan, revealing a dark, square cavity behind it. The air that wafted out was cool and smelled of dry leather and something else, a faint, metallic tang. Her hands trembled as she reached inside. Her fingers brushed against something solid and cool, a stack of objects wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled it out. It was heavy. Unwrapping the stiff, cracked cloth under the light of her lantern, she saw them. Gold coins. Dozens of them. Double eagles, gleaming with a soft, buttery luster, their weight solid and real in her palm. They felt like bottled sunlight. Beneath them was a small, heavy canvas bag, also filled with coins. And under that, a book. It was a ledger, bound in thick, dark leather, the cover embossed with the faded words, Black Creek Way Station, S. Croft, Proprietor. She sat back on her heels, the gold coins pooled in her lap, the leather-bound ledger feeling like a sacred text. The silence of the ruin pressed in around her, but now it was different. It was not empty. It was waiting. The ghost of Silas Croft had not been watching for a stagecoach. He had been waiting for her. That night, by the flickering light of her fire, she opened the ledger. The first several pages were filled with neat, methodical entries, inventories of grain, records of arrivals and departures, costs of goods. But then the handwriting changed, growing more hurried, more desperate. The last entry was dated nearly 90 years ago. It was not a record of accounts, but a letter, a confession, a last will and testament. To whomever finds this, it began. The ink faded but clear. My name is Silas Croft. If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the betrayal is complete. This way station was built with my hands and the money of my partner, a man named Henderson from back east. He was to handle the finances. I was to handle the work. The gold hidden with this book is the entirety of the company's assets. Henderson was meant to arrive 3 months ago with fresh supplies and the payroll for the stage line. He never came. Instead, a letter arrived with a lone rider, informing me that the company was bankrupt, that Henderson had declared it a loss, and that my post was being abandoned. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the man's desolation reaching across the decades, a cold hand gripping her heart. It was a lie. The entry continued. I know Henderson. He is a coward and a thief. He meant to leave me here to die, to let the desert claim me and the company's gold. He will tell the world I ran off with it. But I will not let him win. I have hidden it here, in the heart of the home I built. It belongs not to him, but to this place. It belongs to whoever is resourceful enough to find it, and decent enough to honor its purpose. Use it to make this station live again. Do not let it remain a monument to his greed. The final entries were shorter, the script growing weaker. He wrote of his dwindling supplies, of the fever that had taken hold of him, and then, the last entry, the one that made Alara's skin prickle with a strange, immediate connection. The weather has turned. A black storm is gathering over the mountains. The afternoon stage from Silver Creek is late. I can see it. A small speck on the far side of the flats. It seems to be struggling. The lakebed is not as dry as it looks after a hard rain. It can turn to a quagmire in an instant. I see it stopped now. It is not moving. I am too weak to go to them. I can only watch. I can only hope they are safe. The light is fading. The stage is still there, unmoving. A ship stranded on a pale, dead sea. I pray the mail gets through. Alara closed the book, her heart pounding. She walked to the empty doorway and stared out into the darkness, across the vast, moon-drenched expanse of the salt flat. The stagecoach. He had seen it. The story the old men told was true. Out there, somewhere in that immense white emptiness, a stagecoach had stood for 90 years, and Silas Croft's last thought had been for the mail. The gold changed everything. It was not a treasure to be spent, but a tool to be used. It was the means to fulfill a promise made to a ghost. The next morning, she took stock of her new fortune. It amounted to just over $5,000 in gold coin, a staggering sum. It was enough. It was more than enough. Her first trip back to Redemption was different. She walked with a new purpose. She did not go to the general store first, but to the blacksmith shop at the edge of town. It was a dark, cavernous space that smelled of coal smoke and hot iron. The smith was a man named Jedediah, old and gnarled as an oak root, with arms thick as fence posts. He watched her with suspicious eyes as she approached. "What do you want?" he grunted, not pausing in his work of shaping a horseshoe. Alara laid her canvas tool roll on a workbench. "I need to purchase some tools, a good felling axe, an adze, a broad-bladed shovel, and I need you to look at these." She unrolled the canvas. Jedediah stopped hammering. The sudden silence was deafening. He wiped his hands on a leather apron and picked up one of her father's chisels, turning it over in his huge hands. He ran a thumb over the maker's mark on the steel. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Stanley, Rule and Level Company," he murmured. "Haven't seen steel this good in 30 years. This was a man who took care of his tools." He looked from the chisel to her face, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "This was your father's?" "Yes," she said. "He taught you how to use them?" "He did." Jedediah nodded slowly. "All right, let's see what we can find for you." He did not ask what she was doing or where she was staying. The quality of her father's tools and her quiet confidence were enough. He sold her the tools she needed, sharp and well-balanced, and threw in a handful of cut nails for free. "Come back if you need any ironwork done," he said as she left. It was the beginning of an alliance forged not in words, but in the shared language of craftsmanship. Her next stop was the freight office and general store, run by a woman named Lena. She was sharp-featured and practical, her gaze missing nothing. Alara bought heavy canvas for patching the roof, bags of lime for making mortar, and enough food to last a month. She paid with a few of the gold coins. Lena's eyebrows shot up, but she tested the coin on a stone and weighed it without a word, making change from a lockbox under the counter. "You're the one who bought the Croft place," Lena stated, not a question. News traveled fast in a small town. "I am," Alara confirmed. "Folks say you're a fool." "Folks can say what they like." A ghost of a smile touched Lena's lips. "I run a freight wagon out that way once a month to the old mining camps in the hills. If you need anything heavy hauled, you leave a list with me. I'll see you get it." "Thank you, I will." With her new supplies loaded onto a hired mule, Alara returned to the way station. The work began in earnest. It was a slow, methodical process of reclamation. She started with the roof, clearing the debris of the collapsed section. Using the adze, she shaped new rafters from the few sturdy timbers she could salvage, supplementing them with wood she bought and had hauled by Lena. She learned the art of stone masonry, mixing lime mortar and chinking the gaps in the walls until they were airtight and solid. The work was brutally hard. Her hands became calloused and raw, her muscles aching with a fatigue so deep it settled in her bones. But with each stone set, each rafter placed, she felt not exhaustion, but a growing sense of profound satisfaction. She was not just building a home, she was building herself. One afternoon, as she was setting the final course of stones on a rebuilt section of wall, a man on horseback appeared on the track. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes, and he carried a long rifle in a saddle scabbard. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Howdy," he called out. "Name's Samuel. I trapped the hills beyond here. Saw your smoke." "Elara," she replied, not climbing down from her makeshift scaffold. He looked at her work, his eyes taking in the tight mortar joints, the straight lines of the wall. He nodded in appreciation. "You do good work. Heard someone bought this place. Didn't expect to see it rising from the dead." He gestured with his chin toward the vast, white salt flat. "You know the story of this place, I reckon." "I'm learning it," she said carefully. "My great-grandfather was supposed to be on that stagecoach," Samuel said, his voice quiet. "The one out on the flats. He was a prospector. Waited an extra day in Silver Creek for a letter from his brother. The delay saved his life. The coach left without him." Elara froze, a stone held tight in her hand. The connection, the sudden, sharp reality of it, struck her like a physical blow. Silas Croft's last words. "I pray the mail gets through." "They never found it," Samuel continued, lost in the old story. "The mud must have swallowed it. By the time the ground hardened, no one knew exactly where to look. It's a local legend now, the ghost coach of the Salt Flats." "It's still there," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. Samuel's eyes widened. "How can you know that?" "The man who built this place, Silas Croft. He kept a journal. He saw it get stuck. He wrote it down." For a long moment, Samuel was silent, absorbing the impossible truth. He looked from her to the way station, then out to the shimmering horizon. "Well, I'll be," he breathed, "after all these years." The conversation with Samuel solidified her resolve. Restoring the station was only the first part of her promise. The second lay out on the salt flat. She spent the next month preparing. She used her father's surveying skills, taking readings from the high point of the station, using Silas's journal entries as a guide. He had described the coach's position relative to a distinctive notch in the western mountains. Using her father's compass and a simple map she drew herself, she triangulated a probable location. She built a sturdy sledge to haul her supplies, water, planks of wood to distribute her weight on the treacherous surface, pry bars, and block and tackle. She waited for a week of clear, windless weather. Then, one dawn, under a sky the color of a pale pearl, she set out. Walking on the dry lake bed was like walking on another planet. The ground was a mosaic of cracked, sun-baked mud, hard as pavement. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots and the soft scrape of the sledge runners. The sun was merciless. The heat rose in shimmering waves, making the distant mountains dance and distort. For hours she walked, following her compass bearing. The way station shrank behind her until it was just a dark speck. She felt a primal fear, the agoraphobia of the open plain, but she pushed it down, focusing on the methodical rhythm of her own movement. And then she saw it. At first, it was just a dark shape, a smudge against the white glare. But as she drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was the stagecoach. It stood upright, tilted at a slight angle, sunk to its axles in the baked earth. The wood was bleached gray by 90 years of sun, but it was miraculously preserved in the dry, salt-laden air. The leather of the harnesses lay in brittle, curled strips around the petrified wooden tongue. The name on the door was still faintly visible: Silver Creek and Redemption Overland. It was a ghost, a perfect, silent time capsule. The air around it was heavy with a sense of suspended time. She walked a slow circle around it, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wheels were half buried, the iron rims flaked with rust. The passenger cabin seemed intact. With a deep breath, she took her pry bar and wedged it into the seam of the driver's side door. The wood groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the profound silence. With a final, cracking shriek of tortured hinges, the door swung open. The interior was dark and smelled of dry rot and ancient dust. The leather seats were cracked and split, but otherwise whole. And on the floor, and piled on the opposite seat, were 3 heavy canvas mail sacks, sealed with lead clasps bearing the insignia of the U.S. Mail. They were untouched, unopened. A wave of awe and reverence washed over her. She had found it. She had fulfilled the first part of Silas Croft's dying wish. She carefully lifted the sacks, the canvas stiff but strong, and carried them one by one to her sledge. The journey back was arduous, the added weight making the sledge dig into the salt crust. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and sunburned. By the time she saw the familiar stone silhouette of the way station on its rise, it was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. It was home. That night, she sat before her hearth, the mail sacks on the floor in front of her. She felt like a grave robber, a desecrator of the dead. But this was not desecration, it was resolution. With a pair of tin snips, she carefully cut the lead seal on the first bag. The contents were a landslide of history, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, their ink miraculously preserved. Old newspapers, brittle as autumn leaves, small parcels wrapped in brown paper and string. She opened a letter at random. It was from a mother to her son, a miner in the hills, full of news of a new baby sister and worries about his health. Another was a love letter, the words full of a yearning so powerful it felt alive. In the second sack, she found official documents, deeds, claims, legal notices, and then a thick envelope addressed to the county sheriff in Redemption. Inside was a sworn confession, written and signed by Silas Croft's partner, Henderson. It had been sent from a town hundreds of miles away. In it, Henderson, apparently struck by a bout of conscience or fear, admitted to his scheme to defraud the company and leave Silas for dead. He was relinquishing his claim to all company assets and begged for leniency. The letter that would have cleared Silas's name and restored his fortune had been sitting in this bag for 90 years. The final sack held the most tangible ghosts. Tucked inside a catalog was a deed, properly signed and sealed, transferring ownership of a small, promising silver claim from a prospector to Samuel's great-grandfather. The very letter he had waited for, the one that would have made his family's fortune, had been here all along. His family had struggled for generations as poor trappers and subsistence farmers, unaware that they had been, for a time, rich men. A storm broke that night, a sudden, violent summer squall that was more wind than rain. The thunder cracked like the sky was splitting apart. Ilara sat inside her fortress, the wind howling around the stone walls, and felt a profound sense of peace. The way station was no longer a ruin. It was a shelter. It was a repository of secrets, and she was its keeper. The next day, she rode the mule into town, one of the mail sacks tied behind her saddle. She went straight to Samuel's small cabin. She found him splitting wood. She gave him the deed. He stared at it, his rough hands trembling as he read the faded script. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, awe, and a deep ancestral grief for a life his family never had. He could not speak. He simply nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. She took Henderson's confession to the town clerk, the smirking man's much older, more serious successor. The story rippled through Redemption, transforming the legend of the Croft folly into the reality of the Croft legacy. Ilara was no longer the strange, foolish woman who bought a ruin. She was the woman who had unearthed their history. Help began to arrive, unasked for. Jedediah showed up one day with a set of custom-forged hinges for her new front door, refusing any payment. "Good steel needs a good home," was all he said. Lena began delivering extra supplies with her freight runs, a sack of potatoes, a bolt of warm wool cloth, leaving them on the porch with a quiet nod. Samuel, whose family was now engaged in a legal process to reclaim their ancestral mine, spent his weekends helping Alara rebuild the collapsed adobe structure, turning it into a stable and workshop. He shared his knowledge of the land, teaching her which plants were edible, where the deer came for water. Slowly, a community was built, founded on the bedrock of mutual respect and shared work. The mocking voices in town fell silent. The man who had sold her the deed saw her one day on the street and hurried away, unable to meet her gaze. One crisp autumn evening, a year after her arrival, Alara stood in the doorway of the completed way station. The stone walls were solid, the roof was tight, and glass panes gleamed in the windows. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney into the deep blue twilight. The stable was finished, and inside, a horse and 2 milk goats Lena had given her were settled for the night. The place was alive. It hummed with the quiet energy of purpose. On the great wooden mantelpiece above the hearth, 2 objects sat side by side. One was her father's brass plumb bob, its surface gleaming in the firelight, a symbol of the integrity and skill he had given her. The other was a piece of rose-colored quartz, shot through with a vein of pure silver, the first piece of ore taken from Samuel's reclaimed mine, a gift. They were her 2 inheritances, the one of skill and the one of chance, merged together. She looked out across the salt flats, which were now bathed in the soft light of a rising moon. The ghost of Silas Croft was at peace. The letters had been delivered, the truths revealed. She was no longer an outcast, no longer adrift. She had found her true north, not on a map, but in a pile of stones and a story. She had built a fortress not of stone and mortar, but of competence and community. The $75 had been a pittance, an insult, but the 50 she had spent on this place, this glorious, stubborn, history-soaked pile of rocks, was the best money she had ever spent.